Hey there. Welcome to Sleepy Hidiom, the place where history tucks you in and the past whispers you to sleep. Whether you're in bed, out for a walk, or just trying to quiet your mind, you're in the right place. So get comfortable, take a deep breath, let the world slow down a little. Tonight, we're traveling back to a time that was cold, muddy, and absolutely relentless, but also filled with resilience, courage, and some surprisingly warm moments, too. Before we dive in, let me know in the comments, where are you listening from? What time is it there? Are you cozy in bed or listening on the go? I'd love to know where in the world this little community is coming together from. All right, blankets ready? Tea nearby? Let's begin our journey into the cold, hard, beautifully human world of medieval winter. The sun has long since vanished behind a veil of icy clouds. The air inside your hut is still, not with peace, but with the kind of stillness that only comes when breath hangs visible in the dark, and silence is broken only by the shiver of worn wool brushing against cold skin. You lie on a straw-stuffed mat, wrapped in layers that carry more scent than warmth. Somewhere nearby, a child coughs, a pig stirs, and you wonder, not idly, but with real concern, if you'll still feel your fingers by morning. This is not winter as we know it. This is winter as a trial, as a force, as a looming presence outside your door, waiting for the moment your fire dies or your courage thins. For the medieval peasant, survival was not a comfort, it was a nightly decision, a ritual of persistence. In this story, we walk through the long, bitter nights with them. We step across frozen dirt floors, sit beside the stubborn ember glow of the hearth, and learn what it meant to endure when warmth was a privilege and every sunrise was a small miracle. This isn't a tale of nostalgia. It's a record of resistance, quiet, muddy, aching, ridden in smoke and straw. Start with the house. Not a castle, not a cottage, not even a proper shack, if we're being honest. Most medieval peasant homes were less constructed and more improvised shelter, held together by prayers, goat hair, and the stubborn refusal to freeze to death. The walls? Wattle and dow, which sounds charming until you realize it's just a medieval recipe. 1 part sticks, 2 parts mud, 1 generous scoop of animal dung. Mix thoroughly and slap it between wooden slats. Let it dry, or don't. The cold won't wait. If you did it right, it kept the worst of the wind out. If you did it wrong, congratulations. You just built a very attractive squirrel Airbnb with seasonal roof leaks and a front row view of your stew pot. Roofs were thatched, bundles of straw laid down and prayed over. They sagged, they dripped. They occasionally invited the local birds to nest, sing, and defecate directly onto your belongings. Snow? That was extra weight. Rain? That was indoor rain. And after a particularly bad storm, your ceiling might collapse like a soggy pancake, burying your family in a lovely blend of thatch, mud, and regret. And floors? No planks, no rugs, just earth. You lived on dirt, you slept on dirt, and when it rained hard enough, you got a bonus feature, a personal indoor swamp. Slippery, sticky, freezing mud that oozed between your toes and slowly climbed into your bedding like it had rent to pay. The cold didn't sneak in, it barged in like it owned the place. That's because these homes weren't sealed, they weren't insulated. They were wind tunnels with a roof, gaps in the walls, stuffed with whatever you had: old rags, sheep's wool, moss, stale bread crusts, anything soft enough to plug a hole and sad enough to be disposable. Windows? Let's not even joke. Real windows were for churches and castles. Peasants made do with holes in the wall covered with stretched animal skin, maybe a wooden shutter if they were living large. These let in just enough light to remind you it was still daytime, and just enough wind to make sure you didn't forget how freezing it was. Privacy? Zero. Comfort? Laughable. But character building? Oh, absolutely. If you survived winter in one of these homes, you earned the right to complain about anything for the rest of your life, including, but not limited to, that time a rat chewed through your sock while you were still wearing it. This wasn't a home. It was a barely habitable wooden box of shared misery. But somehow, for centuries, it worked. Not because it was good, but because people had no choice. You made it through by patching holes, stomping on rodents, and being too stubborn to die in your sleep. So, it's night, the wind is howling, the fire's coughing up more smoke than heat. You're exhausted. Time to crawl into your cozy. Wait, cozy is not a thing here. What you had was a bed, and by bed, we mean a wooden frame if you were lucky, some rotting straw if you weren't, and a collection of questionable smells either way. Let's start with the fancy version. If your family was doing well, like you had 3 chickens instead of 1, you might have had a bed frame. Nothing special, just a basic wooden rectangle slapped together with splinters and hope. Inside, a sack stuffed with straw or hay. Soft? Not really. Clean? Definitely not. Comfortable? Not unless you were comparing it to sleeping directly on the cold dirt, which, spoiler, many peasants still did. And straw? Straw was the medieval answer to everything. Bedding, roofing, kindling, insulation, probably dental care in a pinch. The downside? It didn't last. After a few weeks of nightly tossing, turning, sweating, drooling, farting, and shedding skin flakes into it, that straw turned into a sad, matted pancake that smelled like it had opinions. Changing it meant hauling in fresh straw, usually stolen from a field and probably full of bugs. So most people didn't bother until the bed started moving on its own. If you didn't have a bed frame, and many didn't, you just threw straw straight onto the dirt floor. No pillow, no blanket, just the comforting crunch of dry grass beneath your spine and the icy breath of winter licking your ears. And that's before we get into who you were sharing it with. You didn't sleep alone, oh no. Sleeping was a full family and farm animal experience. Kids, grandparents, possibly your neighbor's cousin, and livestock. Chickens roosted above you. A pig might be snoring next to your head. And the cow? The cow got the warmest corner, obviously. It earned it. You all slept in a pile. A tangled, snoring, burping, farting, wheezing bundle of humanity, like a lasagna of cold desperation. The lucky ones got the middle where the heat was. The unlucky ones got the edge. A drafty, frost-bitten no man's land or you might wake up with icicles on your eyebrows and a chicken nesting in your hair. Blankets? If you had one, it was a cloak, scratchy, damp, and probably made from a sheep that had seen things. If you were really fortunate, maybe you had a sheepskin. If not, just layer whatever you had, cloaks, tunics, rags, straw, and then pray. A lot. And because personal hygiene was not the medieval strong suit, the whole pile smelled like a mix of wood smoke, unwashed wool, foot fungus, old turnips, and something vaguely rodent-like. But that wasn't a problem. That was heat. Smell was survival. So you laid there, shoulder to shoulder, nose to armpit, listening to the wind scream through the cracks in your walls. You hoped the fire wouldn't die. You hoped no lice crawled into your ear. You hoped the pig didn't roll onto your face. And you hoped that when you woke up, your toes still counted to 10. Because in medieval winter, sleep wasn't about comfort. It wasn't about dreams. It was about not freezing to death. If you made it through the night without losing a finger or waking up with frost on your teeth, that was what passed for a good night's sleep. Let's get one thing straight. Medieval peasants didn't dress to impress. They dressed to survive. Because out here, in the frost-bitten middle of nowhere, fashion wasn't a statement. It was armor. And the dress code? Wear literally everything you own at the same time. The base layer? A linen tunic, scratchy, stained, and possibly older than you. On top of that, if you had the luxury, another tunic, this time made of wool. Then a second one, maybe a third. Whatever you had lying around that vaguely resembled cloth got added to the mix. By the time you were done, you looked less like a person and more like a walking laundry pile with feet. Those feet, by the way, forget boots. Those were a nobleman's fantasy. Most peasants wrapped their feet in scraps of cloth, sometimes clean, usually not, and stuffed them into wooden clogs. No insulation, no socks, just wood, fabric, and a silent prayer that your toes wouldn't snap off mid-walk. As for trousers, rough-spun wool leggings that sagged like a deflated bagpipe. If they stayed up, great. If not, you tied them with twine and hoped for the best. Medieval belts weren't about style. They were just crisis management. Now let's talk cloaks. These were the MVPs of winter, worn during the day, slept in at night, and never, ever washed. They were heavy, they were itchy, they often smelled like wet goat, and if yours had holes, you didn't cry. You patched it with more goat. Gloves? If you had some, they were made of stitched together scraps of leather, cloth, and old regrets. They didn't keep you warm so much as remind you that you were trying. And hats? Oh, hats were priceless. A simple wool cap could be the difference between feeling your ears in the morning or not. Peasants treated hats the way modern people treat Wi-Fi. Without one, life was bleak and full of rage. But here's the wildest part. The dirt was doing most of the work. Yep, dirt, grime, grease, that built-up layer of sweat, smoke, and life's general filth wasn't just gross, it was practical. Think of it as poor man's insulation. All that gunk clogged the holes in the fabric and kept the wind out. It was like a medieval version of Gore-Tex. If Gore-Tex smelled like turnips and heartbreak. In fact, there was a saying, Not a real one, but it should have existed. The filthier the tunic, the warmer the peasant. People didn't just avoid washing clothes because it was hard. They avoided it because clean clothes were dangerously breathable. Too breathable. One gust of wind and suddenly your underlayer turned into a wind tunnel. And laundry? Oh boy. Imagine breaking ice on a stream, dunking your only shirt into the water, then waiting 2 days for it to dry, assuming it didn't freeze into a fabric popsicle first. Most peasants didn't bother. They wore the same outfit for weeks, months even. They didn't change layers, they just added new ones, like a time lapse of clothing evolution. Children were basically dressed like medieval marshmallows. Their parents bundled them in so many layers they waddled like penguins. The goal wasn't comfort, it was containment. You weren't trying to keep them warm, you were trying to trap the warmth inside and confuse winter into leaving them alone. So when we picture the look of a medieval peasant in winter, forget elegance, forget coordination. Picture someone wearing a goatskin blanket, 3 tunics, a hat made from old curtain fabric, and a belt holding up pants that gave up days ago. Dirty, itchy, mismatched, and half frozen, and somehow still alive. Because in those long, cruel months, warmth wasn't about how you looked. It was about how much wool you could stack on your freezing body before you physically couldn't move anymore. And if you walked like a stiff, waddling scarecrow, that wasn't a fashion fail, that was a survival win. In the medieval peasant home, one thing stood between you and a slow, shivering descent into popsiclehood. The fire, the hearth, the beating, smoky, wheezing heart of the household. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't glamorous. It didn't even have a chimney most of the time. It was just a fire pit in the center of the room, a pile of half-burnt logs, some rocks, and enough smoke to qualify the entire family for early lung disease. But without it, you were toast, frozen toast. The hearth was your stove, your heater, your nightlight, your bug repellent, your mood stabilizer. Everything revolved around it. You cooked on it. You gathered around it. You dried your socks on a stick over it. It was a member of the family, just one that occasionally tried to suffocate you. Let's talk about the smoke for a second, because chimneys? Those were for castles and churches. Peasant homes had hope. Hope that the smoke might lazily wander out through the thatched roof, or a crack in the wall, or maybe just learn to disappear through sheer willpower. More often than not, it didn't. Instead, it filled the room like a fog machine on overdrive. You couldn't avoid it. You breathed it. Your clothes absorbed it. Your food tasted like it. Honestly, you probably smelled like firewood year-round. But here's the thing. That smoke was a double-edged sword. Sure, it irritated your lungs, made your eyes water, and probably shaved 10 years off your life. But it also kept away fleas, lice, rats, spirits, and any living thing that wasn't invited to your hovel party. It was like medieval pest control and cologne. Smoky was the scent of survival. Now, keeping the fire going, that was an art, a family ritual. If that flame died overnight, you were in trouble. Not, oh no, I'm chilly trouble. More like, congrats, the reaper's at the door kind of trouble. The families practiced fire banking. No, not saving up fire like gold coins in a vault. This was the practice of carefully burying live embers under a mound of ash before bed. The ash acted like insulation, keeping those coals just alive enough to reignite come morning. Do it right, you wake up, poke it, toss on a stick, and boom, fire. Do it wrong, you wake up in a cloud of your own breath, with frost on your eyebrows and the horrible realization that you now have to start a fire from scratch in the dark with frozen hands and no matches. Starting a fire in medieval winter wasn't like lighting a scented candle. It was flint, steel, dry moss, and the emotional equivalent of performing surgery with sticks and desperation. One wrong move and the cold won. So everyone, kids, elders, even grandma with her dodgy knee, had fire duty at some point. You poked the coals. You added peat. You fed the flame like it was a grumpy pet that might decide to stop helping you live. Sleep in winter wasn't peaceful. It was shift work. Even the family dog contributed, curling up close to the fire and giving off more heat than the actual logs. Bonus points if you could squeeze next to the dog without it growling or claiming your blanket. But warmth wasn't evenly shared. The person closest to the hearth got roasted like a turnip. Everyone else? They got breadcrumbs of heat and the joy of watching someone else not freeze. It was like standing near a campfire while everyone fought for space. Only your camp was your house, and the fire was the difference between alive and human icicle. If you sat too far, you froze. If you sat too close, your tunic might catch fire. There was no sweet spot, just varying levels of discomfort and singed hair. Yet still, this smoky, sputtering pile of coals was everything. It was where people told stories, shared gossip, ate dinner, stared into the flames, and quietly wondered how much longer winter would last. It was warmth. It was light. It was hope. Without the hearth, the house wasn't a home. It was a barn with a roof. So yeah, it might have smoked you like a ham, but in the war against medieval winter, that fire was your last, best line of defense. And you protected it like your life depended on it. Because it absolutely did. Let's not sugarcoat it. If you were a medieval peasant, your bedroom didn't end with the walls. It extended to your livestock. And when the temperature dropped below toes optional, there was only one real strategy. You invited the animals inside, all of them. Cows, pigs, goats, chickens. If it breathed and radiated even a whisper of body heat, it was welcome. It wasn't just a cute little, "Aw, the animals sleep in the barn." The animals were the barn, because you were the barn. Your house, your stable, your coop, all rolled into one rustic, barely holding it together mud box. And listen, this wasn't some weird medieval quirk, it was strategy. Let's talk cows. Cows were the medieval version of space heaters. Big, warm, slow-moving blankets with legs. A single cow's body heat could raise the temperature in a room by a few crucial degrees. And in a world where your insulation was moss-stuffed cracks and dried dung, that meant everything. So, yes, if you had a cow, it came inside at night. It curled up next to the wall, steaming gently in the frosty air like a bovine humidifier. You didn't care if it smelled. You didn't care if it chewed cud 2 feet from your head. That cow was your thermal MVP, and the rest of the animals, they followed. Goats, naturally curious and always up to no good, often found their way in whether you invited them or not. Chickens roosted in corners, baskets, or up in the rafters, occasionally pooping from above like feathery snipers. Pigs sprawled out anywhere they pleased, usually the middle of the room, usually in your walking path, usually with attitude. Did it smell? Was it noisy? Constantly. Did someone always step barefoot into something regrettable in the dark? Absolutely. But it was warm, and that made it worth it. In the Peasants' War against the cold, dignity came second. You didn't get to say, "Ugh, the pig snores too loud." You were just grateful it was there, because if the animals were snoring, they were alive. And if they were alive, they were heating the room. By late winter, the inside of a peasant house smelled like smoke, sweat, damp wool, mildew, animal fur, and unwashed everything, with a dash of manure for spice. It was awful. It was overwhelming. But to a peasant, that stench meant survival. It meant nobody froze, not last night. And no one was offended, because literally everyone stank. Even the animals probably thought you smelled bad. Nose blindness wasn't just a coping mechanism, it was a life skill. Some peasants even had designated animal sleeping spots. The cow got the warmest corner. Goats huddled near people because they were nosy and liked drama. Chickens clucked to themselves like tiny judgmental roommates. Everyone had a place in the great barnhouse ecosystem. Yes, you might roll over in your sleep and get smacked in the face with a hoof. Yes, a chicken might decide your head is a nest. Yes, a goat might steal your only piece of bread while you're dozing. But again, warmth. Because when your walls are thin, your floor is dirt, your blanket smells like mildew, and your fire is just barely hanging on, a warm, snorting, slightly drooling cow might be the difference between life and death. So go ahead, cuddle the cow. Forget personal space. Forget the smell. This was survival. This was community. This was medieval central heating. Every night in a medieval peasant home was a high-stakes gamble. You didn't just lay down and drift off to sleep. You hoped the fire didn't die. You hoped the cow didn't fart directly into your face. And you prayed, actually, sincerely, that the roof didn't collapse on your head mid-dream. Because when the snow got heavy and the wind sounded like an angry god with a grudge, your roof got personal. Let's talk about that roof. Charming from a distance, picturesque even, but up close, a fragile mat of bundled thatch and old twine, holding back the wrath of nature with all the integrity of a wet sponge. Rain leaked right through. Snow piled up like it was planning something. Wind, it didn't hit your roof. It passed through it, like your ceiling was politely stepping aside to let the storm in. So what did peasants do about it? They patched constantly, desperately. Every spare moment that wasn't spent feeding the animals or not dying was spent trying to plug every possible draft, drip, and hole in that house. And here's where the creativity came in. And a crack in the wall, shove some moss in it, and, sneaking under the door, jam a bundle of rags or straw against it. If leaking, climb up and mash some more thatch into it. No thatch? Steal a turf brick from the nearest field and wedge it into place with mud and stubbornness. Still leaking? Slap it with cow dung. No, really. Cow dung. It was the medieval peasants' duct tape. Yes, they literally smeared poop on their walls. Warm, sticky, plentiful, surprisingly effective. And every year, like some twisted holiday tradition, families would go outside in the freezing cold and lovingly reapply a fresh coat of manure to the exterior of their home like they were icing a particularly gross cake. Meanwhile, inside the house, there were no guarantees. Thatch roofs didn't just sag, they dropped pieces on you. Mud walls cracked and crumbled. Sometimes you woke up with a chunk of ceiling in your lap and a spider crawling across your face like, "Hey, thanks for the new apartment." And even when the structure mostly held, the drafts never stopped. The wind always found that one gap you missed. Always. Right at the back of your neck, just enough to whisper. You thought you were warm. Adorable. That's where the prayers came in. Before sleep, peasants didn't just mumble a casual good night. They knelt, they folded their hands, they begged the heavens for mercy, for safety, for warmth, for a roof that didn't betray them before sunrise. Sometimes they even added a few charms or protections, blessed chalk marks on the door, holy water near the hearth, a whispered prayer to whatever saint they thought specialized in keeping roofs from collapsing in the middle of the night while I'm cuddling a pig. Because when your home is made of sticks, dried grass, and hope, faith and mud become your best tools. So the peasant evening ritual went something like this. Stoke the fire, pile on every piece of clothing you own. Herd the animals inside. Patch a few new wall holes with mud, moss, or goat hair. Look up nervously at the sagging ceiling. Say a very heartfelt prayer. Lie down on straw with a pig for a pillow and hope the wind forgets you exist. That was life. Not glamorous, not safe, not quiet, but incredibly human. Resourceful, resilient, a little gross, a lot determined. Because no matter how hard winter came swinging, medieval peasants always had a handful of mud, a prayer on their lips, and the kind of stubbornness that could outlast even the fiercest storm. When the temperature dropped and your breath turned into little ghost puffs in the air, there was one battle-tested tactic every medieval peasant knew by heart. Food wasn't just fuel. It was heat. And in winter, every bite was a weapon in your fight against freezing to death. Forget fancy dinners or romantic meals by candlelight. This was about shoveling whatever was hot, dense, and vaguely edible into your mouth right before bed in the hopes that your body would stay busy digesting instead of quietly shutting down from the cold. Think of it as medieval thermodynamics. The more your body had to work breaking down food, the more internal heat it generated. So a heavy meal didn't just fill your belly, it kept you alive. Let's start with the main player. The medieval peasant stew wasn't elegant. It didn't have garnish. It didn't even have a recipe. It was basically a bubbling mystery pot on the hearth where ingredients got tossed in whenever they were available. Carrots? Sure. Turnips? Absolutely. Onions, if you were lucky. A suspicious piece of dried meat from 2 winters ago? Toss it in. It's flavor now. Over time, the pot developed what we can only describe as a soul. Some families kept the stew going for days, even weeks, just topping it up with water and new ingredients as they scavenged more. It was food, it was warmth, it was tradition, and probably bacteria, but mostly warmth. Then there were grains, oats, barley, rye, porridges so thick they could double as building material, bread so dense you could use it as a weapon. These weren't soft, fluffy loaves. They were chewy, gritty, and slightly offensive, but they sat in your stomach like a friendly brick of survival. And if you were really lucky, maybe after a festival day or a good hunt, you got something special. A hunk of salted pork, either a full miracle of miracles, a bit of fat. Yes, fat. Peasants prized fat like it was currency. Why? Because fat burned slower than lean meat. It kept your body busy digesting through the night, generating that delicious metabolic heat that kept your insides warm while the outside world tried to freeze you solid. Parents knew the deal. Dinner time wasn't about taste, it was strategy. Eat your turnips or you'll wake up blue was a legitimate warning. Picky eaters, not tolerated. Didn't like mushy roots or chewy barley? Too bad. You ate what was on your wooden plate, or you froze thinking about it. It was tough love with a turnip-based menu. Now let's talk beverages. No hot cocoa. No tea. No mulled wine unless your village was feeling festive and someone hadn't drunk it all. You might get warm ale, thin broth, or if you were really lucky, something that passed as soup but was basically just hot water with hope in it. But regardless of what went into the pot, and trust us, some of it was questionable, the goal was always the same. Stuff your belly, stay warm, and give your body something to fight the cold with from the inside out. Yes, it often led to bizarre dreams. Yes, sometimes it made your stomach sound like it was fighting demons. And yes, everyone smelled a little weird by morning. But it was worth it, because in the medieval world, a full stomach at bedtime wasn't a luxury. It was a survival mechanism. So the next time you're debating a midnight snack in your warm, central heated kitchen, remember, some medieval peasant was once eating their 8th bowl of onion barley mystery sludge, hoping it would be enough to keep them from becoming a human popsicle before sunrise. Let's clear something up. Medieval peasants didn't go to bed. They strategically collapsed while assigning someone to stay awake so nobody froze to death. Welcome to the night shift, medieval edition. In the dead of winter, sleeping wasn't a right. It was a rotating responsibility, because the fire, that stubborn, smoldering hearth in the center of the room, didn't tend itself, and if it died, so might you. So the family came up with a plan, a painfully unfun, sleep-deprived plan. Sleeping in shift. That meant, while half the household bundled up in the human lasagna pile, trying to catch a few hours of rest, the other half stayed up, blurry-eyed, freezing, and on ember duty. Your job? Don't let the fire go out. Stare at it, feed it, poke it with a stick like you're trying to negotiate with a grumpy, forest god. Too much wood, and you'd waste precious fuel. Too little, and you'd wake up to frost on the inside of your nose. And remember, you didn't have a clock, you didn't have a timer, you didn't even have a decent candle. You had shadows, instincts, and the soft, panic-inducing flicker of dying coals. So while your siblings slept, snoring into goat fur and probably drooling on your leg, you sat upright on a stool made of splinters, clutching a twig wrapped in 6 cloaks and whatever dignity you had left, watching fire like your life depended on it. Because it did. And just when you started to drift off, head nodding like a sad marionette, but patient of your breath, a log shifted, the flame sputtered, and suddenly it was go time. You scrambled, tossed in a stick, blew gently like it was birthday candles from hell. Maybe you dropped a little dried peat in there and prayed it would catch. And if it did, you got maybe 30 more minutes of warmth. If it didn't, well, someone's going to be very mad in the morning, or very frozen. Oh, and let's not forget the background noise during all this. Pigs snoring, goats chewing, your cousin Mirek rolling over and muttering about haunted onions again. Meanwhile, you're one wrong move away from stepping in chicken poop while trying to grab another log in the dark. Children weren't exempt either. As soon as you could hold a stick without burning the house down, you were recruited. It was a rite of passage. Your first fire shift. Your first solo stare down with the dying coals. And yes, your first time falling asleep standing up. Even Grandma pulled fire duty, not just because she was wise, but because getting in and out of bed took her 20 minutes anyway, so she might as well sit by the fire once she was up. And let's be honest, no one really got good sleep. There was always noise, always cold creeping in, always someone rustling to swap shifts, or someone else accidentally elbowing a sibling into a freezing draft. But somehow, it worked. Like a smoky, half-conscious dance of survival, it kept the fire alive, and the family with it. And when the sun finally broke through the cracks in the wall, and someone stirred from the snoring pile, the night shift survivor got to collapse into the straw bed, cloak over the head, and savor 3 solid hours of the deepest, most earned nap in human history. So the next time you whine about getting up to turn off the heater or switch out your phone charger, just remember, somewhere in the 1300s, a 10-year-old named Wolfgar was poking coals with a chicken on his head, wearing 4 tunics, and praying the fire didn't go out before sunrise. And somehow he kept it burning for all the mud-slathered walls, all the goat-scented cloaks, all the snuggled-up pigs, and fire-banking tricks. Sometimes it just wasn't enough, because no matter how clever or tough a medieval peasant was, winter didn't. It came howling through the village like a hungry wolf with ice for teeth, and when it hit hard enough, people died. Not always dramatically, not even loudly. Sometimes it was just quiet. A fire that burned too low, a roof that caved in under the weight of snow, a bad cough that turned into something worse when you couldn't breathe through the smoke-choked air and had no medicine but prayer and hot onion tea. Families would huddle together, 6, 7, 10 people, wrapped in wool, dirt, and desperation. And in the morning, only 5 would wake up. It was just reality, not a rare tragedy, not an emergency, just winter. And if it sounds brutal, that's because it was. Even the best preparation could be undone by one bad night. Sometimes it was a storm that flooded the floor with freezing mud, soaking the last dry corner of your straw bedding. Sometimes it was the fire finally giving up after a week of half-burned wood and nothing left to feed it. Sometimes it was hunger, not because you didn't eat, but because you didn't eat enough. You went to sleep with a stomach full of broth and woke up with your body having decided, nope, I'm out. And in the worst winters, it wasn't just individuals. Whole families vanished. Old huts sat eerily still at sunrise. Neighbors would wait a day or two because everyone was too frozen or tired to check. And then finally, someone would knock, push open the creaky wood door, and find only silence. A pile of bodies still curled together under a collapsed roof, as if they had simply decided to hold on tight and never let go. In spring, when the thaw came, the truth came with it. Villages discovered which homes hadn't made it, who hadn't traded at the market, whose fire never lit again. And it wasn't just the cold. The cold invited friends, disease, starvation, injury. You sprain an ankle hauling firewood and can't get out of bed? Too bad. Your child gets a fever and there's no healer for miles? You wait. Someone coughs for 3 days straight in a room full of 10 people? Congratulations. Now everyone's coughing. And then there was frostbite, the slow creeping thief. First your toes, then your fingers, sometimes your nose, your ears. They'd turn black, die while still attached. And if you were lucky, they'd just fall off. If you weren't, infection would set in and do the rest. Some people survived winter at a cost. You could always tell who had been through a bad one. They were missing part, but they were still alive. And that counted for something. Because in those long, frozen months, death wasn't a visitor. It was a neighbor. It lived just on the edge of the firelight, and every night it knocked. Sometimes you had the strength to ignore it. Sometimes you didn't. And yet, even in the face of that quiet, creeping horror, people endured. They grieved, yet they wept. They told stories about those they lost. But they didn't stop patching the walls. They didn't stop lighting the fire. They didn't stop hoping that maybe, just maybe, tomorrow would be a little warmer, because winter may have taken its share, but it never took their will to survive. And yet, somehow, they made it. Not all of them, not every year, but enough, just enough to keep the ember burning, to pass the flame forward, to raise children who would grow up knowing exactly which corner of the hut stayed warmest on the worst nights. These weren't warriors. They weren't kings or queens. They were farmers, herdsmen, weavers, mothers, children, people who lived in houses that leaked, wore cloaks made of grease and smoke, and slept beside goats to stay alive. People who fought winter not with weapons, but with firewood, body heat, and relentless grit. And because they did, we're here. Every crackling log in a fireplace today, every fleece blanket you pull up on a snow day, every thermostat you complain about being slightly too low, that comfort exists because of them. Because someone, many someones, once sat in a frozen hut, patching walls with dung, banking the fire with trembling hands, and whispering prayers over their children, hoping spring would come before they ran out of strength. And when it did come, they didn't celebrate with parades. They celebrated with planting, with patching the roof, with rebuilding what winter had stolen, and preparing to do it all over again next year. It was life, harsh, raw, unglamorous, but also deeply human. Their legacy wasn't written in books. It was built into the bones of the land, passed down through calloused hands, muddy footprints, and the knowledge of where to find warmth when the cold comes knocking. We live in a world now where winter is a mood, a backdrop, an aesthetic, but for them, it was a threat, a ritual, a season-long negotiation between life and death. And they survived it. One cracked wall, one smoldering coal, one desperate night at a time. They didn't conquer winter. No one ever did. But they outlasted it, and in that, they left behind something far greater than a warm house or a full pantry. They left us a blueprint for resilience, a reminder that even in the darkest nights, a stubborn fire, a shared blanket, and a refusal to give in can be enough. So the next time the wind howls outside your double-glazed window, the next time the snow piles up on your doorstep and you grumble about clearing it, the next time your power flickers and you panic because the heater might cut off for 10 minutes, remember them, the ones who wrapped up in filth and wool, who slept beside cows, who ate barley mush for dinner and counted their toes every morning just to be sure they were still attached. Remember the nameless, frozen, defiant ones, as they survived, and because of them, and we don't have to